Good morning. Good morning to all of you and welcome. I am not Maria Pia, as I think most of you know, but it's my pleasure to introduce the next plenary speaker, Pia Paganelli. I've known Maria for a very long time and have enjoyed watching her career as she was first a graduate student at George Mason University and then has become one of the preeminent scholars on Adam Smith and David Hume. So there's not a lot that I need to add to that, except to say that she's a professor of economics at Trinity University. She's the current president of the History of Economics Society, and she's extremely energetic in terms of encouraging Smith scholarship. So she's the reason why, or a major reason why, we've seen a real rebirth in Smith scholarship and Hume scholarship as well over the last decade or so. Published, of course, in Hope, in JHET, and many other places. Just a wonderful scholar and a really nice human being. So, Maria Pia.
Thank you, Sandy, for, where did she go? Oh, here she is, for the kind words. And thank all of you for being here. And by being here, I mean not just physically being in this room right now, which I do thank you for, but thank you for being at this conference. It means a lot. I would like to, before I start, I would like to send my regards to Ross Emmett, who was supposed to deliver his presidential address today, but for a set of circumstances, he will do it next year. And I had to say that when I was first told that he would prefer to have his presidential address next year, I was a little bit unenthusiastic. But then I sort of realized that maybe the invisible hand plays a role. And I take this opportunity to then dedicate this presidential address to Mauro Bujanowski. He was a major supporter of this event. It's the first time that the association is having an event in South America. And I think he would have been ecstatic about the results. Because UDD has been fantastic in offering us this environment, and all of you have been fantastic in being here. So I take this opportunity again to dedicate this address to Mauro. That said, I am a Smith scholar, so I will talk about Smith. And I think that there is no mystery in what I'm going to say, because hopefully the title is clear enough. I make the claim that for Smith, David Hume was a mercantilist. And again, I don't think hopefully the title is not a mystery. But the claim may be because Jacob Viner presents the relationship between Smith and Hume in terms of their monetary thinking as a mystery. Viner tells us that he can't understand this a mystery why Smith doesn't cite Hume on money. And he should, because Hume is this great monetarist economist. And is even more puzzling, according to Viner, because Smith is aware of Hume's theory of money, of the price species flow mechanism. And he is so aware of it that he describes it in his lecture in jurisprudence, and what Viner says, approvingly so. What I think is more of a mystery is actually how actually Viner got disapprovingly out of the lecture of jurisprudence. Because this is what Smith actually says about Hume's theory of money. Yeah, Mr. Hume is exceedingly ingenious. That is not necessarily a compliment coming from Smith. And he seems, however, to have gone a little into a notion that public opulence consists in money. This comes from the author, that Weiner knew, of The Wealth of Nations, which Smith himself defines as a very violent attack against the mercantile system of Britain. So when you're thinking of your major work as a violent attack against the commercial system of Britain, and you're saying Mr. Hume was very close to that thinking, maybe you have a problem. And so what I would like to do is to try to see why Smith is saying this about Hume. Why is Smith thinking that Hume is a mercantilist? And Carlos is looking at me saying, mercantilist, mercantilist, that's a bad word. You shouldn't use that word, right? Because indeed, mercantilist is a sort of a catch-all thing that makes not much sense for the people who actually study the authors that are supposed to be mercantilist, in the sense that mercantilism is not a system, is not like a set of theories that are well-defined, well-organized, have a concrete policy, a very coherent way. Nevertheless, that's how Smith presents it. It is the mercantile system. So even if in reality you may not have a mercantilism, for Smith, he builds up this system. Now, there are many aspects of the so-called mercantile system that are in conflict with each other. There are many policies that may not work if you put them in coherent, if you try to make coherence of them. And yet, one of the things that is thought of mercantilism is the importance of money. Money as gold and silver. So much so that you can try to increase the quantity of money in a country to either make the country richer or to make the country more powerful. And I think this is the aspect that Smith is not liking about Hume. So mercantilism here is seen as a way of accumulating gold and silver to increase the might of a country. But then you can say, well, hold on a second, David Hume, a mercantilist. Maria, what are you talking about? Hume is famous for his attacks against mercantilism, right? His species flow mechanism is exactly designed to prove mercantilists wrong. His idea was, if you artificially try to increase the quantity of money in a country, prices will increase. And as prices increase, domestic goods become more expensive. We are going to buy foreign goods. Industry in the country will go down. But also because we're buying foreign goods, foreigners are paying, we are paying foreigners with gold and silver. So the artificial increase in money will actually not have an effect because the money that we try to keep up will actually go out for paying foreign goods because they're cheaper. And he says the argument in reverse. If you try to artificially decrease the quantity of money in a country, prices will drop. Lower prices implies that domestic goods are cheaper internationally. So we buy foreign goods. Foreigners are buying domestic goods, and they're paying it with gold and silver, so the amount of gold and silver will go back to its original level. To show mercantilist policies are futile. And so Hume is often presented as this baluard against mercantilism because the policies that mercantilists are taking place make no sense. But David once repeated what Stigler, not once, more than once, repeated what Stigler used to say: if you're thinking of betting against Smith, think twice. And so I'm going to show, hopefully, that indeed Hume, for Smith at least, was a mercantilist, and he had good reason to say so. So the price-business flow mechanism that Hume describes is described indeed, as is often presented, but then Hume continues, and he says that there is one expedient by which it is possible to sink, and another by which it is possible to raise money above its natural level. And this is actually going to prove his theory right. So this way to short-circuit his theory are ways in which he actually demonstrates that this theory is right. Why is Smith saying that Hume is a mercantilist? Because Hume says our modern politics embrace the only method of banishing money, the use of paper credit. And they reject the only method of amassing it, the practice of hoarding. Because they're using instruments that are not effective. So what Hume is doing is what Mike Munger described the other day as directionalist. He adopts the direction, but he says that he adopts the premises. But the tools that you're using are wrong. So he's saying you want to actually increase money supply, and you're rejecting the only method that is allowing you to do it. And you instead are adopting the only method that will actually sink money supply. Everything else that you're doing is just making a mess. But if you want to increase money supply, you need to follow the prices as specie flow mechanism. The practice of hoarding. And if you look at Smith, he's actually working through Hume text, and I will show it to you by comparing the text. And he's basically rejecting Hume step by step. Every claim that Hume makes, Smith addresses it and rejects it. In this sense, do not bet against Smith. But because of this, Hume cannot adopt the price-specie flow mechanism. He has to distance himself from it, because it is indeed a mechanism that can actually foster mercantilism. So this is how Hume introduces the price-specie flow mechanism. And this is the first sentence, at least, is a very famous sentence that is mentioned by everybody who wants to say that for Hume, money is irrelevant. Because that's what he says. Money is irrelevant. But he qualifies it. Money is irrelevant if we consider any kingdom by itself. That's true. People stop here. But Hume continues, it's the same sentence. And he says, well, actually, if you are not by yourself, then the quantity of money makes a difference. And having more money makes a big difference, because having money allows you to pay for wars. So the public draws any advantage from a greater plenty of money in its wars. You want to have more money because you will be able to finance your wars. If you don't have money, you can't finance your wars. How does Smith opens book 4 of The Wealth of Nations, which is a book against the mercantile system? It tells us that there are people that fall into the traps of mercantilists, among which, of course, Thomas Mann, John Locke, and then he tells us others. No names, but it's others. Others admit that if a nation is separated from other nations, from the world, money is irrelevant. But when there are connections, when a nation is not isolated, then the quantity of money makes a difference. Having more money is important because of foreign wars. And you're paying for foreign wars by sending money abroad, which is exactly the same argument that Hume uses in his essays. So if you think in terms of Hume wanted to increase the quantity of money to finance wars, and Smith saying, that's a problem. That's a mercantilist sign. Then things start to come into perspective. Now let's see what Hume says. Hume tells us, as Milton Friedman very well knows, that the good policy of the magistrate consists only in keeping money still increasing, if possible. This is Milton Friedman's statement that Hume is a monetarist, right? He's very proud of the fact that Hume thinks like he does. And it's because the good policy of the magistrate is to keep money still increasing. This helps us industry, but also helps us financing wars. What Friedman didn't ask, or at least not that I'm aware of, but Adam Smith did, is what is this good policy of the magistrate? How do you keep money still increasing? That's Hume's answer. Hume gives us the way to keep money still increasing. The only expedient by which we can raise money above its natural level is locking it up. That is because gold and silver. And absolutely preventing their circulation. The fluid not communicating with neighboring elements may, by such artifice, be raised to what height we please. So what Hume is telling us, the price pieces flow mechanism can be shortcutted, and it should be shortcutted if you want to increase money supply. And the way you do it is by locking money up. Take money out of circulation. And the reasoning is very simple. If you take money out of circulation, if you lock up gold and silver, prices will drop. And if prices are low, foreigners will buy domestic goods and will pay them with gold and silver, which will come back into the country, or will come into the country, and I will be able to increase my money supply. Now, this, if the story ended here, would say, okay, then prices are back up, so I lose my competitive edge, but not if you lock up the money that comes in. So if you keep locking up the money that comes in, your prices stay low. And that's a good policy. That's a good thing. The problem is, how do you lock up money? How do you take money out of circulation? Well, Hume tells us. There are two ways, at least. One is to accumulate it into a public treasure. And the other is to incentivize the use of private plate. Now, a public treasure, Hume says, and he goes on, he gives us lots of historical examples of cities or states that should have very little gold and silver, and instead they manage to accumulate this huge amount of gold and silver because of the treasury, because they take gold and silver out of circulation by keeping prices low and incentivizing the industry. Treasurer is challenging, though, because if you're a small country with a huge treasure, what you're telling your neighbors is, I have a huge treasure, and I'm a tiny little country. So you're incentivizing your neighbors to come and invade you. If, on the other hand, you're a big country, and you have this big treasure, Hume says, that's also a little bit on the sketchy side, because then you think, oh, I can do everything, and you engage yourself in very sketchy activities. So you start projects that you shouldn't do. But a treasure is a very effective way of increasing money supply. The one that Hume seems to favor, though, is the encouragement of private plate. Use gold and silver for decoration. He tells us that the Senate, foreseeing consequences of using services of Chinaware instead of plate, prohibit the use of that brittle commodity. So you can have your dishes out of china, or you can have your dishes out of silver. Prohibiting the use of dishes out of porcelain is a good policy, because it incentivizes the use of dishes out of silverware. So to use silver plate in an unlimited way is a good policy. And our tax on plate is impolitic, not a good idea. Why? Again, if I use gold and silver for silverware, I am taking gold and silver out of circulation. I am keeping prices low. I keep money still increasing. And I suppose their late distress felt a good effect of this ordinance, the ordinance of prohibiting the use of Chinaware. Is a good thing in time of distress. Why? Because this time of distress is war. During war, I have my gold and silver that I can melt and pay for my soldiers. It continues. Tells us, look at France. France is great. France, among other things, I have no banks, but we're going to come back to it later on. But there is a lot of plate. All churches are full of it. All houses are full decorated with it. So you have this large amount of gold and silver in private homes and in churches. And this is fabulous because the advantage of this situation, in point of trade, prices are low. I stimulate industry. I bring more gold and silver in. Good policy of the magistrate is to keep money still increasing. And it's fabulous in case of public emergencies, wars. These are the advantages, are too evident to be disputed. What does Smith do? disputes them. This is what Smith tells us. Talking about financing war through gold and silver, says it's nonsense. The idea of melting private plate to finance wars is insignificant. HUME, mentioned in France, like you have all these churches full of gold and silver, all these houses full of gold and silver, and it's great because you can melt it to finance wars. What does Smith say? France. They had tried to use gold and silver, private gold and silver, to finance war. And what happened? Nothing. They didn't derive any advantage. But they actually lost in fashion. So not a good idea. What about the treasury? Smith says, well, maybe in the past, princes would accumulate treasure, like gold and silver in treasure, but this is something that not to be seen today. Finance war and silver, finance wars with gold and silver? Nonsense. The last war that Britain fought, Smith says, cost 3 times the amount of gold and silver that was present in Britain. It's impossible. Wars are way too expensive to be financed with gold and silver. Makes no sense. Hume is wrong. How do you finance war then, if it's not through gold and silver? Well, Smith tells us. So it's not just criticizing Hume is actually telling us the correct version of the story, which is wars are paid through manufacturers. Says merchants sells goods in foreign countries. Merchants are paid with foreign bills. The government buys foreign bills from the merchants and use those foreign bills to pay for provisions of the troop abroad. Gold and silver, nothing to do with it. So Hume's first policy prescription, when you look at his price specie flow mechanism, is lock money up. And Smith's answer explicitly to this point, it is perfectly crazy. One way to lock money up is to bury it. Right? You make a hole in the ground, put the money in, no more money in circulation. That's Hume's suggestion. And Smith says it is perfectly crazy to bury money in the ground unless there is a war and you're trying to protect yourself against your gold and silver from being stolen. Otherwise, it's perfectly crazy. That you can sink money below its natural level. And there is one mechanism to do it. Banks. Banks issue credit. They introduce paper as a substitute for gold and silver. When you're starting to issue paper money, money supply increases, price increases, and therefore, gold and silver leave the country because you're going to buy foreign goods which are cheaper. So whenever you introduce banks and introduce paper money with it, you're going to have an increase in prices. You're going to buy foreign goods, pay them with gold and silver, you've left with only paper in the country. So you can sink the amount of money below its natural level by introducing banks and paper money. And Hume is actually quite cute, because he says, what a pity, Lycurgus did not think of paper credit when he wanted to banish gold and silver from Sparta. Because Lycurgus introduced rusted pieces of metal as form of money in order to banish gold and silver. Didn't quite work. Would have worked much better had to use paper money. Somebody goes to Hume and says, but David, understand that carrying around gold and silver is uncomfortable, it's difficult. I said, okay, fine, you can have a bank. But that bank cannot lend. It's a 100% reserve bank. It's a bank of deposit. It's a basically safety deposit box. You go, you drop off your gold, you get your paper, you use the paper to pay, but the bank does not increase money supply. Not a private bank, a public bank, among other things. No banks at all. One, out of convenience, paid by taxpayer money. And the advantage of it is the destruction of paper credit. And by doing it, you keep prices low, you keep competitiveness in international markets, and not to mention that so large a sum lying ready at command, convenient in times of great public dangers. So banks should be banned. Paper money should not exist, according to Hume. Because they increase prices, they cause lack of competitiveness, and the banishment of gold and silver, and therefore they put the nation at risk of being conquered because you have no way to pay for wars. What does Smith say? Here Smith is actually calling out Hume by name. He said, dear David, you know that high prices that you think were caused by banks? Just bad season. It was bad weather. It was not banks. It was a bad net of season and not the multiplication of paper money that caused an increase in prices. The multiplication of paper money does not increase price level, as a matter of fact. So Smith tells us, differently from Hume, that banks are actually not causing disasters. They're not a threat to society or to the economy. Banks are actually good. The introduction of paper money is actually something that is good for the economy. Banks have contributed a good deal to the growth of Scotland. They haven't put Scotland under threat. This is something that John mentioned yesterday. How is it possible to have Smith saying that the introduction of banks and paper money has no effect on prices? And therefore, Hume is completely off, according to Smith. Well, Smith tells us money is a highway. And you can build a highway on the ground or a highway in the sky. If you build a highway on the ground, you can't use that land to cultivate corn. But if you put the highway on the ground, on the sky, you can use the land below. And here's, I think that Alvaro Perpere on Monday gave us a very nice description of how money was understood in medieval time, and he claims that Smith keep using that idea. The money can be seen as pecunia or capital, capitale. Pecunia is just a medium of exchange. And capitale, no. Capitale is a way that you actually earn something from it. And here, I think, is an example of Smith understanding the use of gold as having an opportunity cost. if you use gold as pecunia, as medium of exchange, the cost of it is the fact that you cannot use it as capital. Once you substitute gold with paper, then you're releasing that cost, and gold and silver can be used as capital. And so what Smith is saying is when you're introducing banks with paper money, you're actually allowing gold and silver to go abroad as capital and be productive. So prices don't change. They don't have to change. And money, when it goes abroad, gold and silver, when it goes abroad, and this is what John's point, that Smith is, in his theory of banking, is actually the anti-mercantilist, because he's saying as gold and silver go abroad, the country benefits, because abroad that gold and silver is invested. The actually exact opposite of what Hume is saying. And so, while Hume suggests ban banks, ban paper credit, Smith is saying have free banking. Allow banks to issue their own money. It's great. Exactly the opposite of what Hume is saying. Now, there are some similarities between Hume and Smith. So the people that associate them don't associate them for no reasons. Is that indeed both of them believe that commerce is very important. And an increase in commerce is going to increase your standard of living. They agree 100% on this. There's no other way to increase standard of living than through commerce. But where I think that they differ, and where I think that Smith takes on Hume, is a method. Is how do you increase commerce? And again, Hume seems to suggest that low prices and hoarding as a consequence, or low prices achieved through hoarding, which is a mercantilist idea, is a way to achieve this increase in commerce. While Smith thinks that the expansion of market and division of labor is what allows for an increase in commerce. And so I think that for Smith, Hume has gone a little into the notion that public opulence consists in money. And I think that he took Hume's argument step by step and showed Hume wrong in The Wealth of Nations, and therefore could not adopt Hume's mechanism as a way to celebrate anti-mercantilism. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Pia. I really enjoy this. I just wonder whether there might be another reason to support your argument. As you show very clearly, Adam Smith knew perfectly well the working of Bill of Exchange. That was the way in which commerce was undertaken in those days. You know, carrying gold was a very rare thing. You know, when we say that gold, people increase prices, it means that you don't go to the market with the pound sterling. I mean, gold were very rarely used. Work I did many, many years ago on the gold standard showed that merchant, they were all using bill of exchange. So gold was not a means of payment, not whatsoever. So I just wonder whether one of the reasons of why Smith is not, I'm saying this in support of what you're saying, is that Smith understood very well that gold was not a means of payment. Gold was not carried around to pay vegetables. For a peasant, they might not have seen a silver or a gold coin in their life. And so this might be also another reason. It is, of course, also odd that the Hume, who was so knowledgeable in many things, didn't think of it. And that's really a puzzle. That puzzled me more than why Smith did not use the flow specie mechanism. Why did not Hume understood that gold was never used as a means of payment?
Okay, maybe I collect a couple of questions and then I'll try to answer.
Thank you, Maria. This was really clear, very convincing. I'm wondering, between the time Hume wrote and Smith wrote, there's the 7 Years' War and a banking crisis in Britain. To what extent that gave more perspective on to Smith that Hume didn't have?
Right.
So thanks. This was very nice. If you're right, and the price specie flow mechanism was actually a mercantilist device, then I guess it reinforces my point that mercantilism doesn't really mean anything. But that's not my question. So from your description of Smith's argument about how you finance wars, right? So he's saying, well, merchants export commodities, they get paid in bills of exchange, the government gets these bills of exchange and uses them to pay for the wars. That sounds very close to me to our caricature of a mercantilist argument. You know, just run a favorable balance of trade, and that's the answer to your policy problems. So was Smith a mercantilist as well?
Can I answer these first and then I come to you, John? Just because otherwise it gets like a very huge pile of questions and then I risk to make a mess. Not that I will not risk to make a mess regardless, but yeah, Christina, I think you're right. I think Smith has a very clear understanding of what goes on, and Hume does not. Why doesn't Hume know? Maybe because of a difference in timing. But on the other hand, I'm a little bit perplexed that that's the only explanation. I think that Hume has a very passionate way of justifying certain kind of things. And so his mechanism is indeed ingenious. The price specie flow mechanism is a marvelous mechanism that actually works in his frame. And if he does believe that you do want to have more military might, one way to justify both the presence of military might and commerce is to say commerce will help you become richer, but how? Well, I'm using the price specie flow mechanism to allow you to have more money to pay for your army. Again, it may not be the correct way, but there is consistency in a sense in what he's saying. Again, I'm not saying this is right, and I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying that's one way for me to reconcile why Hume is so off, in a sense, on money. And his attacks on banks and paper is really like, whoa, really? Like, you're really saying to ban all sorts of banks and all sorts of credit in a time in which, again, Scotland is developing through, as Smith says, the presence of credit. Yes, Carlos, if mercantilism doesn't exist as the price specie flow mechanism used as Hume may suggest, then Smith is also not a mercantilist. But in a more serious way, I think that that's not Smith's problem. Smith is not concerned to having enough to finance wars. His main concern is how, because like he is very much aware of the fact that wars are financed through debt. Right? So his argument is one of the problems that we have with wars today is that we are financing them through debt and people don't know how expensive they are because they don't face the bill. And so we can expand our empire through wars, pay through debt, and people just dream of empire because they don't see the bill. They can sit in London comfortably reading newspapers and get upset when the war is over because they have no more entertainment. Okay. So his concern is more about state capture from special interest group that cause those wars more than how we actually finance the wars. I think, John.
Thank you, Maria Pia, for a very profound paper, and thank you very much for the dedication at the start, which is greatly appreciated.
Yeah.
One short question and one short comment, so you have time to think about the question. The short question, which I certainly can't answer off the top of my head, is does Hume ever really make contact with bills of exchange? You have a lot of citations about banning paper credit. Well, does he really understand bills of exchange? Does he talk about them? A short comment, I very much agree with you on splitting Hume and Smith in their monetary economics and using mercantilism in this way. But we should also remember they're both the friends of peace. They're both the friends of peace with France in particular. And Hume is very much in favor of friendly commercial rivalry between countries, but he is very much against the jealousy of trade. So Josiah Child would speak of his desire, Child's desire, to extirpate the trade and production of Holland, and both Hume and Smith are absolutely against that.
That was wonderful. One of the things that links Smith and David Ricardo, whom you're not talking about, is their opposition to the sinking fund. And the idea is that you get a sinking fund, then that's going to encourage the government to go to war. And so that, to keep peace, you keep the government poor. And this is sort of, so having no seeking fund changes the incentive of military adventures. And I think that this is, when I first saw this, I thought this is really interesting, but I think it's much deeper.
Yeah.
Thanks to your paper. This is not just an oddity sitting there, but this is very deep.
Yeah. Does Hume understand bill of exchange? I don't think he does, to be honest. He seems to bundle anything that is related to paper together. So it really doesn't matter what they are. As long as it's paper, it's bad. And they all work in the same way because they all basically increase the quantity of money in circulation. They're both friends of peace, Smith and Hume. In theory, yes. But I think that Hume is much more concerned about the criticism that are given to commercial society than Smith is. And one of the main criticisms of commercial society is that commercial society makes effeminate soldiers. And if you have a effeminate soldier, you're going to lose a war because you have soldiers that won't fight. And so Hume is trying to justify, I think, to the critic of commercial society, that commercial society is actually going to be a mighty society, military mighty society. And so I think that he's answering the criticism that luxury makes you weak by saying, no, luxury makes you strong. Commerce makes you strong, military strong. So the objection that you have to luxury and commerce are nonsense, because you will become a much stronger military power if you have commerce. So I think he may indeed favor peace, but is answering the criticism of commercial societies instead. The sinking fund, yes, I think that's part of the story. It's not something that I've incorporated because Hume doesn't mention it. And what I cared to show was that Smith is basically taking Hume step by step and showing that Hume is saying nonsense. But it's definitely part of Smith's story. And are there other ways in HUME to finance wars? And again, yes, in the sense that a poor, non-commercial society will not be able to have a lot of soldiers and to sustain long wars. Commercial society allows people to be fed the whole time, even when they're fighting wars, which is a major problem if you're not a commercial society, because you either fight a war or cultivate your land. Right? And so if you're fighting wars, you're going to starve eventually. So in part of his argument is commercial society allows you to have longer, better, not longer, but more soldiers and fight more vigorously. But what he's also saying is that using domestic soldiers becomes more and more expensive the more commercial you are. Right? And the beauty of commercial society is it makes you rich in terms of gold and silver, and you will be able to buy soldiers from your poor neighbors. Right? So part of his argument is exactly to say, the more gold and silver I have, the more cheap soldiers I can buy from my poor neighbors, and the stronger I will be militarily. Making gestures, not quite sure what it was meaning. Like Italian make gestures, so we understand each other. But when a Chilean makes gestures, like, what are you talking about?
No, I just asked Sandy for permission to have a final word. Sandy, if I may.
Absolutely.
So one housekeeping announcement and then a final word. So first of all, this afternoon we have 2 buses leaving today. One goes to the hotel, one goes to the central bank. Please be aware to take the correct bus, please. It's very important. The final comment is on the conference. Maria Pia, yesterday, today, at the coffees, has said thanks to lots of people, and I heartily join the thanks to the HES team, Amy, John, Carlos, the executive committee, to the UDD team, Catherine Tilly, and everybody who has made this possible. But I think we have one great thanks, which is remaining, to Maria Pia for having the conference in Santiago. Thank you very much, Maria Pia.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank all of you. Thank you very much. And again, I would like to say a special thanks to Mauro, who should have been here today.